Okay, so let's get started. Good morning. Very quickly, my name is the very happy moderator for this day's work, and I am at the head of Proarti. It's a fund, and I'm really in culture for a long time. I work in public institutions like the museums or theaters or the Paris Town Hall, for example. And I really am concerned with networking and international networking. And I'm very pleased to welcome at this roundtable session a series of talents, international networks. How do international networks in the cultural arena meet to build a project? So I would like to introduce yourselves briefly, as well as the organization that you work with. And so let's go around the table quickly. Florence Francisco for stage productions. Good morning. So I will not repeat my name. It was just mentioned. It's written as well. I am work in the development of performing arts, real networking for stage production. It's an office that supports international artists. There are two Swiss artists, Daniel Handma, who is from Zurich, and Payayoka Palimani, who is an artist living in Athens, and Jasmine, choreographer, Jasmine Morin, who lives in near Lausanne in Switzerland. So I've been working at this for the past 25 years now, and very quickly I started working with networks, and I really have closely examined the question of international networks, and I started in this trade with a couple of choreographers, with Eric Satoumi and Eric Lamoureux, and very quickly we went across the borders of France to go elsewhere to meet other actors and stakeholders to work on the international level in networking. Hello, my name is Sergio and Chianca. I'm head of Burokultur in France for the past 10 years. I've been doing it's totally associations work, but even though I am international myself, coming from Brazil, and I live in Lyon for the past 30 years now, the international issue for me has always been very important. And so, for the dance biennial, for example, for 3 years, Brazilian costumes and Brazilian dancers that have come over. I've always worked on cultural exchange programs this way. But I have met various choreographers. Some are just starting up. Some have a lot of experience. But they usually have international backgrounds, either people who have already worked internationally or, between the two countries. For 6 years, I worked with a Hungarian artist, and now one from a choreographer who lives between Lugano and Paris, also next to Lyon. I work with someone who has recently arrived. And so the international aspect has always been a part of my work and my career path. And so now I will pass the mic on. Nicolas Bertrand, and I work in international performing arts for music and cultural heritage. I've been administrator of Image Aiguë theater, and we have it really works heavily in international works because the artistic approach was to mix various ages and cultures. I've started to work in IETM, so we're in performing arts for the past 12 years, and this network has been very important in the way that I work in the various projects that I conduct, developing networks, contacts, but the approach and the method is extremely important as well. Yes, good morning. My name is Isabelle Andreen, and I am artistic advisor at the Spectacle Vivant in Brittany, in France. And it was created by the regional cultural association, the DRAC, and other local artistic associations. And so here we have a vision of international works that's quite it's cross in international projects, but we also think of the process of support for developing broadcasting, for example, but and we can come back to this later. But with respect to what I do, my involvement and experience, I have started to work as a coordinator in a Parisian company, and this project was a project that was artistic in nature, but also that we wanted to share it with young choreographers throughout the world. And so, how could the artists meet the choreographers, etc., what venues and different places, and how and to do this. So we'll get back to this later. Good morning. My name is Olivier Pierre-Noël. Olivier is my first name because I have three first names, actually. So Pierre-Noël is my last name. But so I'm a producer with the SIT Protections Stories in Theatre, SIT, and in the United Kingdom. And I'm also the finance manager of Zero Theatre in the Zero in London. So we have three areas. We do 3,000 performances per year, and also I work within the Talaware Theatre Company, which is the first and most important theatrical black theatrical company, black British theatre in the United Kingdom. It's the biggest one. And so for me, what international means is because, of course, I'm French and I live in the United Kingdom. And so the mission that I wish to carry out is to give support to the foreigners coming to the United Kingdom, or, the British that go to Europe. They don't talk about the continent, they talk about Europe in terms of British work. And I focus on things happening in France. And so next week I'm producing 2 French projects, and we'll be touring the UK, and we also will be doing a production in London as well. So that's it. So, Paco, my name is Paco Bialek, and I come from broadcasting world, international world, and that's how I've been working in touring. And so I wear several hats. I do production, but also training, and I will now be working with Production Bis, which is a support production company based in the Île-de-France region near Paris, to do professional, receiving of foreigners. And how to do this, and how can a small regional festival become a national or international one with all professionals coming from the world over? So yes, you were able to quickly touch on what you do, but I would like to know how you personally became directly involved in your networks. What types of networks were good for you, whether abroad or in France, to build your professional career paths? We talked about the IETM that Nicolas and Isabelle had mentioned, but if we come back a bit further upstream, and how did you get started? What types of partners when you started working international? Does it remain pertinent today? Of really starting out. Well, yes, I can answer. Yes, your initial steps, initiation. Well, yes, like all international projects, it's before being a network, you have to meet somebody, a relay person, a contact, because that's how we do it for international networks. How do we meet relays, contacts, people that you can have discussions with, that can open doors for you, can direct you towards new contacts, new environments. Trans-Europal is a European network that gathers together independent areas that all have different uses beforehand. For example, old factories that are no longer in use, or military barracks that you could use again for a new usage. But Trans-Europal really has a theme with respect to the building that it occupies, and transforming the building, for example, after the Cold War, and opening up to the Eastern European countries. That was a really very important time. And I met Philippe Gombert, who was co-founder, who was the former director of Aldis Calbec, and who was someone who had introduced me to it all and explained to me how the European networks worked. And this way, there was a lot of cross-linking with others. And so, you have to meet people who work in European networks outside of, General Assembly meetings. But other than that, it's a good way to start, because you have to meet the people who coordinate these networks and who have personal relationships with all of these, other than the major events. Well, yes, I think that's it. Well, that's what I want to hear. Exactly. And of course, how did you meet those people? Were you by yourself, or was it just by accident? How did it happen? Well, no, actually, I went to a professional training course with Aldis Calbec, and it was to coordinate the Trans-Europal, and that enabled me to meet these people and meet with them, and of course you have to invest of yourself and do investments. You have to do micro meetings, so to speak, because all of these networks, it's in more intimate spots that you meet, because it's different than the big professional meetings and major events. And so, different, each way that you look at different topics, and it's a bit of mentoring as well. How do all of these people who are in the trade already, embrace you, for example, in performing arts? And of course, you have to invest. You have to be mobile. You have to invest from the outset. it usually happens quite quickly, especially in the European network. People are very benevolent. Someone else who would like to give their account? Well, yes, actually, since you're asking the question of the very, very beginning, the spark, that's the question, if I understood correctly. Well, I feel that really concerns me personally because, working internationally was never a real concern for me. And I led these projects in Lyon about 7-8 years. There were 4 wage earners in this association, and we really were working throughout the entire city of Lyon. And so I really worked on this issue. And, the thing, it was traveling. It was the travel. You have to be mobile. You have to go to Paris to start with to get into a new territory, make appointments, meet people, tell them what you do. These personal encounters, personal meetings are very important. That's the initial phase. And then secondly, what was 7-8 years now, I've been working with companies that were, that could work internationally. But my major part of my work was in France. And then one day I said to myself, I would really like to go elsewhere. I think I've been doing this in France. I really know this very well now here. And so I need to get up and go international. And so in the beginning, I did, some studies in I did my studies in England, actually, and then for about 10 years I hadn't spoken English anymore. And so, I wanted to get back to it, and so that I went there for a year to really get back into English, and that's how. And then I started to go into that. I went to the universities in England. I went to see if they had night courses that I could, or maybe by correspondence courses. And so I think for the international aspect, whether in a company or for production, you really need to work on yourself first to start to trigger other things and beam out. And then, of course, I really wanted to do this university course that I had never done in England before. And so there were some networks that really do present themselves to you, and some that don't. And of course, you meet people that like the international work. And so that's how you start setting up your network. And so, yes, you make connections, circles, you see who are present here and there, and then who's really out there. And so little by little, by positive contamination, things naturally fell into place. But I really wanted to go international, but all that personal work was very important as well. Well, yes, so for Florence Francisco, personally, I started by being in charge of broadcasting for the choreographic company, and I was passionately involved in this. I just loved it. It was to identify the artistic proposals and how it could open up to a greater broader public, and I found I was very isolated in the beginning. When I started in the 90s, 92, I was so lucky to meet up with some great people in this choreographic network in France, and I met a great Dame Marie de Courtieu, who's a great lady whom I met, and who had developed the project of the choreographical development national center with artists Joël Boudier and Régis Badibia. and she advised me to become part of an international network. And the first network that I participated in, based on this advice, was IETM, obviously. And where I succeeded was in this international networks was that it's very of great interest for resources, because I went towards international dissemination or use, and so as an actress and as a real actor of, in the area of dance and choreography, and it was important to meet other actors, international ones, and really have interaction with other actors and talk about our respective practice, how we go about our work in France and England and elsewhere. It was really an opening up for me, and a great possibility to better become familiar with the networks and the territories.
So we do see that the personal part and mentoring is something which can be determining. And we realize that Europe and European programs or European networks are a first step or a vector for facilitation, and networks to open you up to Europe are, let's say, the first step, which really works, I think. Have I forgotten anything in your approach that has a meaning for people who want to get into the same approach? And the startup, then when you say that I want to prepare, I want to go international, am I summing it right, or is there something else to add? I don't know if you've forgotten anything, but what I would like to add, in my international course, it's a question of languages, of course. It might seem obvious, but it's not easy. But the initial training in living languages, I think, is the main way and the first essential point to be able to speak several languages independently. Makes things easier to start with. That's what I did. During my course, it was languages, but not in the professional culture network. But I was interested by all kinds of things, and at the time I was trying to find my way. It was through theatre, and I got into performing arts, and I fell in love with street art. And street arts are a network of festivals. And we talk about international network. And that is where it is interesting, because street arts, due to their nature, are times for exchanges. You have festivals with several companies, generally a lot of professionals coming to the major meeting points, and we meet a lot. And the idea of that is that if we meet a lot, we talk a lot, we exchange, and exchanges are more nourished than when you just meet from time to time. If I compare with the network of closed venues, with everything is programmed by structure, you don't generally meet other companies, unless there is an exception. When you're working in the streets, you're constantly exchanging with other people. And I think that considerably facilitates the exchange of information and networking, both in terms of artistic point of view and culture. So, what are the major meetings? In France, got one in June, one in July, and one in August. June is Vivacité in Sotteville-les-Rouen, a small town next to Rouen, a big international meeting for street arts, covering 3 or 4 days. And in July, Chalon dans la rue in Chalon-sur-Saône, an international appointment as well, a larger one in terms of programming, with a selection of companies, about 150 to 200 companies for each session. And of course, Aurillac Festival de Rue, the largest in terms of companies. It's 500 or 600 companies over 4 days. A true marathon for professionals. And there you can have all kinds of foreign professionals. From that you have these meetings and you identify who does what, where they come from. And you might say, maybe I'll go to the Spanish festival or Korean festival or Belgian festival from the people you met. It's by touring that I came into the international. And with companies I started to create my personal web, but also based on what exists. What is interest of going abroad is to get inspiration. And you work and say, what could we do in France to improve the way we are hosting foreigners? I don't know if this was the right time to speak about this, but... Well, I just wanted to talk a bit about what I have done before we go on to the following stage. I was a show producer in France to start with. And when I got to the UK, I became interested in the local professional organization. That is how it happened. So for me, it was ITC, Independent Theatre Council, UK Theatre, and Stage 1, which is a really extraordinary program. It's called Stage 1 New Producers. And this is a program organized by SALT, with the 45 largest theatres in the London West End, equivalent of IETP in Paris, an association to support private theatres. And in Paris, they manage part of the fees. The equivalent in London is called SALT. It's a charity, non-profit making association who train the new show producers. It's really open to everyone with an application. And for me, it was very important to follow the training, to understand how it works locally, start creating links. They have a program, a mentoring program. I had a mentor, a producer in a theatre in Northampton who really helped me. And that is how you create links. And I think to end with this, I think that Steve Jobs talked about connecting the dots. So you remember that when those who don't know, when you're a child, you've got all these dots on a page, and they are numbered, and you link them to each other to create a picture. And international relationships is like that. Each meeting, each interaction is a point you're creating. It may not have an immediate purpose or a consequence, but at some point something is going to happen, and all of a sudden the points will connect, and it will create a picture, which will be a project. So you mustn't be discouraged by the fact that when you create a point and this connection, you've made an effort, there's no immediate tangible consequence. One day the points will really create a project, maybe. Well, thank you for that account. It's true that what we mentioned here, we will get back, Olivier, to your singular experience, because it's talking about expatriation, but we've talked about networks, and I think we need to get back to that. The networks we have been able to discover thanks to mentoring, training, professional contacts. We've talked about festivals, and so starting with French festivals and their international part, if I take up your example, Paco, what I would be interested in, is to ask you, if you look at typology, the platforms, the networks, festivals, you've got national platforms. Can you try and link up these different types of organizations? What can they provide? Which are most active from your experience? And what you wanted to do, Paco, also. How the experience of going to a festival can then bring feedback for yourself in the support to French artists towards the international world. So we are at the heart of the subject, both typology in terms of organization, which is most active for you from your environment, your vision, and how your experience of this type of structure has led you to define your own method to support artists to move them towards the international scene. Well, I will not answer exactly, but almost. Let's start again from the previous question. When I came to the Image Igus company, there was a company already working internationally. I was not the one who brought along this development. And it was well supported. It was LAFA, which is another type of network, which leads to centralizing work in France. You work in France and one foreign country. The company was working was touring and putting together productions with partners and artists from other countries. I think it was around 2000, if we want to talk about history. When I got there, we joined IETM. This was not a priority beforehand. To work internationally, we didn't need it to be in a network. But the IETM network gave us a chance to become off-centered from the French dimension and to consider projects for the company in a more extensive way, both geographically, less on a bilateral project, but rather projects with partners from different countries, which also led us to reinforce projects with European funding, for instance. And over a long-term period, it led us to operate in a different way as an artistic team. And the partnership aspect became very important in the way the team worked on a daily basis. So IETM is a network. Can you define IETM, where it comes from, how it works? Because, I read it, our text this morning. This network, which was in 1981, actors in live performing arts. You have major institutions, including the British Council, for instance, a French Institute, to the actors who are freelance and independent, with festivals, with places, venues, with companies, with the whole diversity of agencies as well, regional agencies. And in terms of artistic form, theatre, circus, dance, all live performances, not so much music. Main is performing arts, theatre, dance and circus, mainly. And this is a network which is particularly active in Europe, but with members who also come from North or South America, from Australia, from Asia, some from Africa, but not many, and Oceania, organized around meetings, 2 major meetings every year, and then there are meeting formats in a more reduced way to discover a country, a local situation, or meetings on specific issues. So inside the network, I don't know how everyone experiences it, but inside this network, there are sub-networks. Historically, there was one called IETM Balcon Express some years ago, which supported the structuring and development of cooperation projects between countries and actors in the Balkans, the Balkanic area, but a lot of meetings take place at the IETM meetings. When I'm talking about being more off-center, it encourages us to meet other people and to see that we could find other ways to work, to design and roll out our projects. If I sum up, it's to un-French yourself. It's important to say it. I think it's an important subject to become less Franco-French. Does anyone want to say something regarding your question and your image? I think that's a good starting point from this and this image that we're building. Regarding the choice of places where we're going to work, there are a lot of places. We can see that the international can also be worked on in France. You talked about it regarding the festival. When we work internationally, it's not only to say we have to go abroad, you have to identify the places, but how can you choose the different points which will then form an image? We're knowing that for this picture, you need to have a beginning of a vision before you place your dots on the map. And you have to be open to intuition, to meetings, interaction, and be strategic at the same time. So how do we do prospecting? How do we identify places? IETM is a place which is a relay, and is in the international development strategy. It's good to go to IETM, but you must not be too strategic when you go to IETM. If you are too strategic, you're going to miss important meetings. It is an open network, an informal network, and you meet relays. If we are too close to something too operational, we will miss the meeting opportunities. Go to TPAM, to the Tante Messeux, all these markets for performing arts. Clearly, we are on a market, and so the strategic positioning will be different. IETM and a market is perfectly compatible because you also find people on the market who go to IETM. And so the human relationship created will be built up on basic questions and also on sales issues. And that makes it interesting. And I think that is a strategy to have. And then there's a question of how can a company implement funding in terms of prospect, of keeping a watch. How can you do this when you want to develop internationally? And this remains complicated. So we try to answer these questions regarding the spectacle vivant in Bretagne. It's really where we are. How can we accompany the international development and also pleading with the territorial authorities to say you need to support mobility for prospecting. How can a point will not have an immediate effect, but I've got a medium-term view. How can I invest to do that? We try to work on this international artistic presence with a deploy where we support this prospecting initiatives. Then how can the artistic teams find means with their authorities? How can they fit into the budget, make choices to include this development? So I got maybe 2,500 euros on international development. I'll choose 2 destinations. One, or that is where you need to work on this point. This is an internal structural decision made by the company. Sergio? I'd like to bounce back on that. I was talking about the way you have to do work on yourself. For me, this is something that I felt that this work was necessary. Paco said it also. It may seem obvious, but it's not necessarily for everyone when you talk about language. I had the case of artists that I brought into IETM. I chose a meeting in Brussels, for instance, because it's still a French-speaking world. But the fact that not speaking English at some point, you feel a bit shy and a bit silly. It's important to sit down to listen to music or something. Everyone has to find their own way, you take part in working groups, and talk on the issue of language. We're talking about traveling. The first way you travel towards another is to learn that language. You can't learn every language in the world, but at least something which means that you can be comfortable without being fully bilingual, but be able to act quickly, understand, and have an answer, and to be on more or less equal footing. It's a question also of the cost of traveling and the work that you need to do yourself. It's what Isabelle was saying in some way. You have to define priorities in terms of budgeting as well. It's an anecdote for me, but at some point I said to myself, you can't always go to a festival with companies. Sometimes the companies don't go to the festivals, or not much to international festivals, or they don't necessarily see the interest because their concerns are very immediate, managing the accounts at the end of the month with your nose to the grindstone. Some artists feel it, but the actors in production as well need to define it as a priority. In my case, as an anecdote, I said to myself, I need 2,500 or 3,000 euros a year. That's what I do, 3 or 4 appointments a year, even if it means having a smaller office, being organized differently. At some point, I think there is really a strategic decision and a political decision in the English sense to define a strategy, a position, and go ahead, because you need to meet people. And this means traveling. Everyone is not fortunate enough to have support to travel. Really, that's a point that we could look into. We have very little support when we need to prospect. Maybe let me bounce back a bit on the subject. Talk about the news. I was fortunate enough to take part in a meeting organized by the French Institute this week. We were presenting a program called e-Portunis. I encourage you to consult it. I did understand that it could be a solution. As I think we need to comment it. I have a superficial vision of it regarding international mobility with criteria and constraints, of course. There's a question of self-funding the first mobility and then support by regional agencies. And here on the table, the possibility of other programs funded by Creative Europe funds to support artists or professionals, or unless I've misunderstood. Or to start with, regarding mobility, I think we must mention On the Move, a platform and a network to provide information, which is extremely precious, and calls for projects and all the mobility funding for artists worldwide. If you carry a project or if you are a producer, if your structure cannot make a request for mobility for your artist, you'll have an overhaul view. The artistic team that you work with abroad may be able to mobilize funds. It's a very horizontal point of view. Not always look at funding on the French side, see what you can find in France to produce something which is cooperative, international, and transversal. It is a very rich newsletter which links up to many networks. It's a relay. It's a network which is very close to the field and very active. If I can interrupt it. On the move. On the move. Otherwise, on e-Portunis, it is a new program, It's kind of pilot project carried by the Goethe Institute regarding the development of mobility, but it's not a support for prospective mobility. We're talking about mobility in a framework where you have to have, I don't know, at least 2 weeks. It can be divided into parts. We're talking about a collaboration, artistic collaborative in creation, with support to mobility for projects. And then there is a lack of balance in France. There are some regional agencies who look into this issue. There are agreements with the French Institute and the regions, the territorial agencies, who work very differently, sometimes in cooperation. Sometimes cooperation, you go off for a week for a workshop with an artist. There is a lack of balance here. That's why I would like to encourage. I think we really need to plead with the agencies to open up the regional agencies up this question of prospective mobility. Switzerland. I also work on the Swiss territory with 2 Swiss artists. I also had a project called the Swiss Selection for Avignon. It's both artistic and Swiss programming. I think that's a very interesting approach in Switzerland. There are 2 antennas, co-antenna in the Swiss Roman territory and for Helvetia, a foundation which clearly supports dissemination for Swiss companies. They really have financial systems which allow the stakeholders in the field of diffusion, to dissemination, to travel abroad, to take part in events, festivals like the Tanks Messe. My role as a disseminator with 2 Swiss teams was funded when I went to the Tanks Messe. I think it's very interesting, but it means to give you a good chance to communicate today on the creation of by Swiss artists by means of the professionals in for international dissemination. Thank you. Just a word on the inequality between recent and Switzerland. You've got all the cantons. You've got for instance, there's more existing in the Roman, there's Switzerland, and there's also the federal organization. For instance, for Avignon, you have 2 nights. If you're working for a Swiss company, you'll have your train ticket and 2 nights accommodation. And this means the person who are supporting come with the artists to come and meet people. And once again, I think that's quite right. We need to be inspired by this model to do lobbying in France, a kind of lobbying. I mean, it's not the National Assembly, but try and put pressure on the tutoring authorities so that they understand the interest of these policies, which are long-term policies. We can't launch an international tour. Just like that, it takes time. Or this prospection has a cost. You need to invest and you need to travel. Maybe another point regarding what you were saying, Sergio. There are some collectivities who have budgets for international projects in order to go out and identify them and to prospect. If it's part of the artistic team's development, explaining why they want to go to such and such a place, you can ask for funds directly from the collectivities, even if it's not specifically intended for culture. It might be for economic development, for instance. And then the question of lobbying, if we get together locally, if we go to the town hall or a group of municipalities, we can find arguments and find some means, not tremendous, but enough to organize the cost of traveling, which will have an impact in the territory.
Thank you. I would just like to pick up on a couple of topics that are very specific here and have Olivier and Paco take the floor. Olivier, who does support of French projects in England and also in experience of, receiving the people. But before that, because we have talked a lot about ourselves, but I would like to, one or two questions, open up to the floor, and if you'd like to just comment on something or ask a precise question of what we've been talking about. We have a mic, a floor mic, if you wish. Thank you, Frederic Botti. I'm also in the IETM. I'm also on the advisory committee, which is one of the organizations of this network. What's important to me, of course, everything that you have described, it's really a willingness and something that is built. And we do this, and personally, and for this campaign, we have 10 or 12,000 euros that is dedicated to the international works. And so very quickly, you can feel the effects. And there is an impact when you choose that road, but it's quite difficult to persuade the artists, actually. But one question, but maybe you'll be talking about this. There's a lot of dance. Yeah, we talked a lot about dance and funds or non-verbal aspects regarding international promotion. And we, it's using the words. That's a big part of international development. So, of course, it'll be the IETM, bien sûr. But what is your feeling of this? Okay, I think Olivier will talk about this, but before we do so, anyone else? Okay, let's go. Olivier, please. Well, yes, very good question. I produce this festival in Edinburgh. It's non-verbal, and it's called the Bigre by Pierre Guillois. It's Fifth Bowl production in Britain, and I also produce another show which has an English adaptation. Cedric Chapuis, which is called Beat. And regarding the language, I was speaking about the United Kingdom. There's no real market for a French language show unless it was for the French community living in London and not elsewhere, and a few Francophiles here and there sprinkled around. So the British, they're not very interested, so they just won't buy the tickets. And in the UK, if somebody doesn't buy a ticket, you do not present your production. So it's not philosophical or anything. It's not a concept. It's just the reality. So really, anything including subtitles, it's for the opera only. It does exist, Some people try to do it, but it's really an exception. It's not an example to give at all. So I would not recommend to any company to launch a French language show in England. In the UK. Well, yes, very quickly, we do have this question crop up because we do promoting on the international level. So we have very few projects with French text. And so, of course, we do have subtitles that are starting up. We don't have the effects of this yet, but today I don't see any other means by which we could work on promoting text without subtitles. Yesterday, there was a discussion on language and how can we include languages differently, not necessarily binary subtitles. It could have an artistic aspect in text theaters, but we see very clearly it is difficult, but we are starting to examine this, and we're doing it, and we're going to see what's happening in the next 2 years. But that is just coming along with what we have said before. So, Olivier, maybe you can talk about this. Sorry, but what's interesting here is imagine that, we've just heard that on the British market, you go into the market once you have adopted the English language. That's just about it. So that's just a resume. You can be more precise on this. But maybe if we take an example of one or two projects. Regarding this work, regarding the products adapted to the market. And of course, it has to be launched on the market and penetrate the market. And so now we need to know what the methods would be. And so what would be the various phases that you could, of course, we're taking the British market here, but each market is different. Each market has its own specific aspects. But now we're talking about the British market. Well, yes, each territory is different, and that's why it's so very important to have local relays. I'm a local relay for in Great Britain or the UK for foreign productions or French productions. And so for Bigre, how did it work there? Well, we had a French show producer, and he said, Pierre Bigre, he presented a show. It was really not bad. He's created it. He's starting to be on tour a bit, so you should go and see, actually. So I regularly go to Paris, and so I went to Châtenay-à-Labrie, a wonderful theater there, just above Paris. And so I went to see Bigre, and I really thought it was fabulous. And so, as far as the product is concerned. But I thought that maybe the British public, could really identify with this show. And so, if you meet someone who, really, just falls in love with your show, then that could happen. And so when when was this? I think it was in the winter of 15-16, I think. Yeah, I think that's what it was. And so then, well, I met the team, the artistic director and the production team, the promoters in France, to see, what they wanted to do, whether the UK was of any interest to them, and whether it was worth going that route. And in the UK, I was starting to think about how to proceed, what would be phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, etc., and maybe change them, move them around, phase 2 with phase 3, etc. And so I started going left and right, and so you have to meet. Maybe it could be the French Institute in France, in London, and the French Festival. And with several of the Edinburgh theatres that were interested in the show. And so we started talking more precisely about dates, technical conditions, the venues. And so it was technically quite complicated, actually, to set up. And then the next very important phase was to have the theaters get interested to come and look. And so there was a venue director who came to look. And so, we all do shows, of course. We all do performing outs. We, send the video, etc. But he came and saw it live. And that's where everything was concretely triggered. So to convince was to finance it? No, not at all. It was discussion, appointments, meetings, pints of beer, lunch. Well, yeah, a lot of things happen over beer in the UK. So, that was it. To insist kindly, because just to give you an idea, recreation and leisure and theatre in Edinburgh, I think they have 20 venues, and they're producing 280 shows in one group of venues, and they do 23% of the ticketing for all of Edinburgh. And so this group is really very popular. They're very in great demand. You talk about USP, unique selling point, USP, and they use it in marketing, saying, okay, what is it, what's the specific aspect? So being a foreigner, well, that's the specific aspect. It's being a foreigner. So that could be a unique selling point for your contacts. Of course, you're in the UK, so out of 1,000 people, they will talk about 995 British people, and you will be the 5% people that are not British. And so that should be an asset. You shouldn't see it as a disadvantage at all, because you're different, and that's where that comes in. And so we are in the artist trade. It's very artistic, and so they're always looking for creativity, things to discover, and so that's a huge asset. Even if you're only two, you have zero network in the UK, and so you can still have people be interested in you and what you do. And so for the company, this means going to produce it in Edinburgh and go and ally and hook up with another group to work with you to define the conditions of a future potential. Yes, right. So the British market is much less subsidized than on the French market. Just to give you an idea, I deal with the Soho, and I do the budgeting. So we have a 6.5 million pound budget, and our subsidies for l'Arts Council in England. There are some departments, that fall under the Ministry of Culture. It's 450,000, so that's pounds, and so that's about 10%. And we are considered, as being subsidized for 10%. And this is how it works in the UK. The ticketing, the commercial, the marketing part is really very important. And so ideally for a company, you have to get some help in order to understand all of the issues of production in the UK. So you have to start with simple things, things that seem simple, for example, the title or the poster itself. And these are things that really are essential. And you have very poor shows that work with really good signs or posters, and some really bad posters that have great shows behind them. So, I mean, good, but I mean, that's maybe not the right adjective to use. It's adapted to the market, being adapted to the market. So a good poster isn't the same thing in the UK, in Germany, or in Portugal either. So it's not really the same thing, unless you have a global brand like Coca-Cola or something, but we're not there yet. So I've got a question. Is there a difference between a London market and the rest of England and its promoting and commercial marketing? And so, of course, there's cultural policies per region, etc. Well, yes, there's a huge difference, actually, with respect to the various audiences. One way of illustrating, which is very interesting, is the Brexit referendum, for example. On UK, there was 52% to leave and 42% to remain, and in London, it's 70% is 70% to remain in the European Union. So the mentalities are totally different, and opening up to the international mindset is totally different as well. So, and the stakeholders in culture are focused in London mostly, and of course, the theatricals there. We all go to see shows, of course, so we're the first ones to buy the tickets, and so they're all based in London as well. So when we have a show that isn't such a isn't more of a general public one, it's difficult to succeed in London, because you will find public for all sorts of genre, and but if you go on tour with your show, you can come to into an area that's like Leavers territory, for example. The public is going to be radically different, and maybe the message that you're bearing and the way that you communicate it through your show or through your play will be perceived differently. Things that are implicit in London are not going to be very clear in Leeds, for example. So I don't know if that was clear. So it's easier to produce something in London. So you foster various types of shows to create interest amongst various producers. So what do? You change the poster, you change the title, you adapt techniques for the stage sets to make it easier to go on tour. And so you found a huge producer, British producer, for financing. Did you have English money coming in or not at all? And what could be the perspectives in the work? Do you target inside markets, British markets, or the vast English-speaking world? Well, we wish to go strategically we chose the Edinburgh Fringe platform because it's naturally international. Really, it's a huge international stakeholders there and actors there. So if you want to do something international, you go to Edinburgh. That's it. It's the biggest world festival, 3,000 plays and shows, a lot of professionals that travel to go there. And so we feel that if we think the show has extraordinary potential in the UK as well as internationally, depending on the topic and of course, whether it talks of, of friendship or solitude, conditions of living, city living, for example, a lot of kindness, a lot of poetics going around, very poetic as well. And so, and burlesque as well, yes. So it is very burlesque, it's very gay, and, all of the, it really reaches out to a lot of different levels, different publics. So we're talking specifically of the UK. For those who remember Jack Datty, who really succeeded fabulously in the UK, and more recently Mr. Bean, for example, or burlesque, and the Monty Pythons work fairly well in this, and so British humor, and when you can really laugh at yourself, that works well too. So, and you have to believe in the potential of the huge publics that come out to the show. Now, if we talk about communication for the sets, technically it's a great challenge for us because you pay the tour for when you mount a set. If you take 2 days to mount your set, a show could quickly become non-profitable, and so we have to work on technical adaptation of the sets. The British technical teams are really wonderful, extremely well organized. And so you can do a lot of things that you wouldn't think possible. And then you have to find the right relationship between the theater and its natural public. For recreation in Edinburgh, that's great. And, in London, you have to kind of target the venue, the size of the venue, the audience, the time frame. Sorry, I'm going a bit all over here, but I wanted to explain the various pieces of the puzzle here. And so, what about the distribution? Are you going to, or, the time frame? Is it going to be 4 weeks or 6 weeks? What about the logical extension of it for the UK? It's usually to attract private investors that will then relay the production of the show to, for the next step. Okay, so that's it as far as how it goes. Well, that's interesting because for that example, it's your job and it's really current. It's very, so we can't really come to any general conclusions. But the market, it's a huge market, and so as you said, it can actually open up onto other. It can spin off actually. Into broader things, and so it could be cross your fingers, and it can open up onto other British markets or further off, and so it could be quite successful, and we do wish so for the French productions. So now we'll Paco. Now through you, we can come back to the way that you can finally. Was inspired abroad, and how you can transfer the artists, and how the Crater Festival, Creator Festival, how do they receive foreign artists in France. Well, the Creator Festival is a street festival of street art that ends there. They're in different venues. They have 1 week of shows in in the public areas, and it's Denis Leforêt, whom I pay tribute to, who's responsible for this and who's in charge. So he's been really changing things for the festival, and he's been looking out internationally now, very concretely and very efficiently. And to do this, he called upon a cooperative called the Cellule, and he passed it on to Production Bis, with whom I still work. And it's like a toolbox of promoting and organizing, and that had a special aspect where we're all bilingual or trilingual, and so therefore we all had an international networks in the street art and circus art as well. And so circus artists. So the programming had to be better adapted to the international scene. So you had to stop putting on the grid all sorts of shows that couldn't go on tour. So of course, if people, we want the people from the foreign countries to come and to come back, and of course we wanted them to receive them correctly as well, and the hospitality had to be right. And so we had to have a specific invitation program. And so first of all, they had to come and see what was happening here, and really customized programming and customized conditions for them to come over, and what we could offer them had to be concretely set down. So then we had to do the budgeting. Of course, it was bilingual production, which was became part and parcel of the Creator productions, and it really is informal and very pleasant indeed. And I really like this festival for that reason. And something else that we have set up was a program for inviting them over with their overnight stays at the hotel were offered to them, and with good land transfers from the airport to Nîmes, and also had programs to have them meet up with others. And so the aspect of this professional program, and the specific aspect also of this festival was it was in the beginning of July. So we're in the Cevenol region. It's extremely hot in the afternoon. We don't do anything until 6 p.m. So what to do during the day? So we organize professional encounters and regional companies, and to make sure, that they can tour. So we have to do the presentations in English. All of the presentations are done and translated into English. And we've also created cultural tourism. So we, right from the beginning, in the initial years, we brought them around to visit the natural, all of the monuments and natural heritage of the Cevenol region, which is extremely rich to discover. And so we organized exchange and interaction between them. It became, just a very spontaneous meeting place, what we called river meetings, just like at a little bar next to a river, and we told them to bring their towels and bathing suits so they can, have a dip in the river. And so we've been doing this, and we are calling them river meetings, and it's well recognized now and acknowledged for being very efficient, because there were about 80 professionals that were coming to this river bar. And now we've seen various little groups we're starting to form and lay around along the banks of the river, and talking about what could our next projects be. And so we had very diverse and various meetings. We had Korean meetings, Russian meetings, American, Chinese, and also European countries that is often presented in festivals in Spain, Italy, Belgium, the UK, and Germany this year, Holland as well. And so this means of working in an informal manner has enabled us to note that the personnel that's there, because it's informal, you can create links very easily, and ties are being created, and the creator organization does a lot of customized meetings. They really look into it individually, and we've all worked at one point in time with them. They know exactly what they're looking for, and hence we could really work either to have them meet with artistic teams that are present, that are best suited for them, and of course we ask them all to play the game and play along. And so during the week, for example, we will ask the company to create a session in English, of course, if it's pertinent, and if they have the text, which means that a company from Ile-de-France in the Paris region, came with a text that they translated into English, and that way they could work abroad and do really important projects in South Korea. And that way you have Korean, French, work, and this was really a first for this company, and they, could build the bridges along this.
Sessions in English are prerequisite. We also create an ideal program, called a tailor-made program, which allows these foreigners to come and follow a program which is intended for them. Will not them just look through the programming, maybe modest, but of French or two French programs, something that can't travel. We prepare a program over the week, saying you can see that's in English at such a session. You keep that one, make sure you book that's limited. Seats are limited, so we put it in the welcome pack, along with a list of professionals present, who can also see who is there and say, maybe I'd like to meet so-and-so. So they have lots of tools, a very careful organization, excellent catering, ideal conditions to see the shows, and the result, we have been able that professionals come back. They say they are attracted by the welcome and also by the artistic offer. Some say, I'd rather go to Alès rather than go to Chalon in the streets. There's too much information I don't understand. There's no tailor-made welcome like for you. Here I can find 2 or 3 offers that I can program. And sometimes it's more positive to come to Alès with just 20 programs, whereas in Chalon where there are 150. So this really tailor-made welcome means that the international aspect has been growing over the last 9 years. More than 35 professionals from the world came this year. At the same time, for 7 years, we have been working on developing a workshop for emerging foreign students who work with us to work on the European market of street art, to create a pitch for your show, meet artists playing at the festival. All this, of course, is in English. We had 14 trainees, I think, from 9 different nationalities who also have a link, and we explain you have a link with professionals who will come and see you pitching. You have a chance to go and meet them, and why not work in the future with them? So do not hesitate. Get in touch with us so that the relationship does occur. That's also the game with artists and professionals. You can meet at the river meetings, in informal meeting times that we create during the whole of the festival. The support that we get with that, generally these artists are sponsored by professionals that we invite regularly. Even if they don't come anymore, they send foreign artists. So we get support from a number of institutes. With Catalonia, for instance, we work regularly with Fira Palega. And this year, for the first time, we had the French embassy in New York who paid for the tickets for the American delegation to come to the festival. So we create support to mobility, which means you can have a number of hotel nights and meals covered so the professionals can travel at a fairly affordable cost. That's what we develop with this spirit of exchange and made-to-measure work in what we know. What I would like to suggest you do now, before we have take some questions, maybe you could throw a highlight on your part of your experience about things you haven't been able to deal with yet, which might be blocking areas. If around the round table it was possible to change things, what do you think it could be? What is necessary today to better facilitate access the artists to the international world? Is it in the way of producing shows, or getting support? Well, I have a suggestion to make. So all suggestions are valid, so it's just something I have for the public. As Isabelle was saying, you need to have a strategy and at the same time be open to the unknown. But it's something that I met. Sometimes we have companies who want to go international. Let's say to do into English more of the same. They want to do more of the same, but internationally. And sometimes it works. I say if it works so much the better. Some people do exactly the same thing everywhere, and it works perfectly. But it is not always adapted to all of the projects. And sometimes in the meeting, there might be a door which could open for more collaboration. And collaboration means that your project might change from what it was originally. And that might be difficult because when you're carrying a project, you believe in it. It's our baby. It's somewhat delicate, but sometimes this meeting means you might change the artists. If you want to show in a foreign language, not say, but such an artist speaks English or German, he will play the same part, but in German. Once again, it can work. There's no absolute rule, but you must be open to the fact that maybe you take along the text, you can collaborate on stage directing with a local stage director. There are many possibilities. The idea is to be open to the fact that you may have to change your original project. Other suggestions? I quite agree. More and more we are seeing that international dissemination, even if you want to have an approach in terms of sustainability, the same ethics, I don't think you can think of international dissemination just as being there to sell as an isolated thing. I think the openness and collaboration need to be there. You have to think about transforming the project if necessary. And I think it's interesting to see that you also have a kind of workshop and you also host foreign artists. I think that if you want to develop things internationally, we must ask ourselves how we are going to welcome at home. as an institution, it is important. We want to encourage dissemination of our artists from Bretagne abroad, but what is the capacity of Bretagne to have foreign artistic teams? Because it's part of the network in many foreign countries. The artists are also disseminators as well. It's a question of hosting. When you're working on export, we have to change our mindset. I'm not sure if it's really a suggestion, but let me speak in favor of friendliness, whether it is the professionals or the teams. Maybe everyone needs to be more relaxed in these meetings. Something which came up several times, conviviality, friendliness. Olivier mentioned when he's talking about looking for partners, you need to chat around a pint of beer. We talked about what you're talking about, the river meeting. I think it's not enough to just identify a platform and network and going there. In that platform, you need to identify the times. See, for me, for instance, is a criteria. Some festivals, I don't go there because there's no time plan for professionals. And I'm not a programmer. I can't go just for artistic programming that I might be able to see elsewhere. So you have to identify networks, places, platforms, but also see what they're offering for professionals. Are there meeting times where you will have roundtables, go and meet people later? Other times we're going to have a drink in the evening to develop this aspect. I think the interpersonal aspect is extremely important. All of the projects will take years. You have this time factor, which also creates trust. This is where you can meet people, see if they're going to last, if they're going to come back. So I've been seeing the same person for 3 or 4 years, and so on. I think that only kind of friendliness and a warm welcome can create this. So I'd like to speak in favor of having this on all festivals in France or elsewhere. It's quite difficult to answer the question, I think. It's really linked to the artist's profile. So I will answer the question by the gentleman, a question of the Daniel Hellman show, Tomboy. Daniel Hellman is based in Zurich. Daniel speaks a lot. He interacts directly with the audience. So he created this at the Kessler in Zurich, in German-Swiss, but the subject of the play, and he wanted, because it is an artist who's talking about the sex workers, male, but he's also going to talk soon about female sex workers, and he wanted to speak to German-speaking Swiss audience, but also in Romand Swiss, in France. Tomboy was presented in Avignon in 2016 at the Off Festival, and he presented it in French. He has toured internationally in Italy, in the UK, the SIG Festival. He will also be showing the play at in the Edinburgh Fringe for the first Swiss selection for this international festival. It will be in English this time. So this play means that he can travel internationally because the subject for him is a very important one. Beyond Switzerland or Germany, where he's also shown the work. We know that sex workers is professional, is legal, for instance, in Germany. It's not the case elsewhere in Europe, where the governments are finding it difficult to legislate on the issue. for many decades. So it's important for him to express himself in English, in German, in Italian. So he works upstream from the hosting offers to be able to express himself in several foreign languages. Then if he's going to do a presentation in Asia, he will do it in English. There are examples of theatrical offers which can circulate internationally. Also French offers for French artists who travel the French-speaking world. Also international networks. And theatre maybe is a bit more complicated, and the question of subtitle exists for some of the plays. Then I don't know, so have I got a bit lost? No. We're also talking what were the hurdles, the problem, what we would like to see change, if you have anything. Well, I'll get back to that. I think Paco also had something to say. Going back to what Isabelle was saying earlier about hosting artists and welcoming them. So in Créateur Surface, first year we created what we called a ping-pong project. We did it once, it went quite well. It was an exchanged artists with a principle of 2 foreign festivals, one in the UK, International River Festival, and Créateur Surface. Both artistic directors made a selection of shows which could be international. The exchange that year was to say the French festival is hosting a selection of UK companies chosen by the artistic director called Frank Wilson. And Denis Laforie did a French selection which was sent to the UK. The expenses, the approach, the set, and everything was distributed between the two operators. And the result was for the companies, the UK companies. We had 8 came that year. We'd had a special British edition, and since we've had other international focuses on some other countries, last year was Dutch with the Dutch Performing Arts, and that year we had 8 English companies who came. It was the first time for them, and they were able to tour after that with a true international approach. They were finally left their island, and they were welcomed in excellent conditions. In the same way, the French companies who went to play in Stockton the following month were able to meet a different market. I think it's quite an intelligent way. It really means that you can divide cost and financial efforts by involving the companies. Nicolas? Regarding blockades or something, question diffusion, circulation, I think we can also see internationally in the creation approach itself. For instance, have a residence elsewhere in places where dissemination is not so tidy, there's no market, no venue. But also consider relationships with other artistic teams, which make it possible, as you were saying, to open up to the unknown. Also to agree to be transformed and moved by others, and sometimes it leads us to invent new forms and working on exchange, not only regarding the dissemination aspect, which is very important, but also creation. And to bounce back on what you were saying, there's another thing. When we go to meet, whatever the occasion, professional meetings or others when you meet foreign artists. It's good to know them not only personally, but also to know what they do. So I'd like to encourage everyone to go and see the shows abroad in the field you're interested in. And then you understand your contacts better, what they're saying, what they feel, what is their daily experience. Go and see shows everywhere you go. If you go on holiday, wherever you go and see shows. That really is important. I'd hand over to the audience again to know if there are any reactions or questions. I have about 15 minutes left. So, just a little comment. Renato Lombardo from Milano off. I will be speaking at 2:30. I'd just like to make a comment to say that here we all agree about exchanging culture and language and for culture to circulate. Take shows abroad. I think it's we just have to see it now. I think it is the richness of culture, and we all say that we are all professional operators. It is difficult to take a concept elsewhere. And we have the budget issues. It's difficult to say to the Ministry of Culture, like say that the future is important. So, as future is like a language is not a problem. There are techniques to overcome language issues. We don't think when we're still ahead, like I am. If I think about 15 years ago, today it won't be so much a problem. You can have subtitles, special glasses or something, augmented reality technologies and so on that will solve problems. And now, how can we convince the majors in culture that this really is a necessary step? And this brings me back to Paco. He doesn't shut himself in a festival format. I found it very interesting. I heard that in the UK this doesn't work so well because the market is not really subsidized. In France the market is subsidized. So this great festival, 9 years if I understand right. You've been there for 9 years. 30 artists, street artists. Is that it? So, it's supported by a national scene, one of the rare ones, interested in street art, and who works very hard to get a recognition of this discipline, which isn't really one, it's all disciplines together, with a specificity of working in situ outside theatres. And the National Theatre made a choice to take a budget to make available to develop this part. Makes me dream. It's a dream festival for us. I got my company, got all the producers, I can support my 3 companies. That's right. 30, how many companies? This year we had 17 companies altogether. About 20 offers each year. It is a small festival compared with the major international markets like Chalon dans la Rue or Aurillac. The question, if I want to do a festival like that, what is the budget for each company to set up all this dream system? Maybe each, if it's 17 companies, it's 17,000 euros, I don't know. So I'm just asking that because we'd like to put something like that together. And what would the investment be for a company? And what will it return in terms of revenue? Is it a market problem? Is it a culture problem? That's what I mean. Well, for the budget, I was somewhat expecting, but I don't really have an answer. Well, of course, it is an investment in the budget dedicated to festivals for Crater, then it's difficult to know exactly how much it costs, because you have the accommodation costs, the nights for the professional catering, which has a cost, plus, of course, all the logistics, the shuttles, rentals, and so on. A budget like that, I don't know how much it would be. The idea is that this priority for 9 years has never been argued by the national scene, and even has been increased. For instance, we have 20 professionals who are invited, selected by us, and then the list is sent to the management, who will validate the actual invitation or not. Will we book them a room or not? We turn to what we call the big fish. Professionals from the whole world representing the festivals have an actual capacity to buy and invite. I don't ever talk about sport mobility, which can then come from sport, and have the actual capacity to produce dates internationally for these companies. There are French companies, I would say, but not only. There are also foreign companies who come and who will then tour international thanks to Crater Surface. Thank you. I would go to the Italian Ministry of Culture and say, I need 500,000 euros for sort of 17 companies. They'll say, you're crazy in Italy. In France, it's possible. That's what I love. I love it as well. Another question? Please introduce yourself. Luc from Opal. I have a question, maybe for the Brittany agency, who can answer. With the others, we talk a lot about European programs, but aren't there any other mobility programs like Interreg or things like that, who also, I think, open up? When we listen to you, particularly as gentlemen in the UK, we talk a lot about market. We know that performing arts does not really self-subsidize, or very little. Couldn't we have programs encouraging mobility? We would have a chance to meet, to have a different cultural offer, because we've got different cultures, without having an objectives linked to profitability. It won't work without a subsidy. Here we talk about programs, a national scene, national stage. Couldn't we have programs beyond Creative Europe, which is 1% of the European budget? It's not much. It's big machinery. It's help industry. So couldn't we invent programs for cultural meetings in Europe between peoples, more open than just market? I think that I think it is necessary, but it is not enough. And have a merchant relationship in performances is somewhat limited. Well, yes. Well, yes, there are funding in European programs, but they remain programs supporting projects. Everything is possible as long as you have a project and you put it together. But on the Interreg structural funds, culture is more and more absent. So to get transport of Interreg funding, at least for about 10 years, the word culture has appeared less and less. So the cultural stakeholders will have a territorial approach to this funding, or topical economic development, cultural tourism, immaterial heritage, intangible heritage. European funding are places whether you have political, territorial challenges, so it's going to be cooperation between stakeholders. Mobility is only a way to produce. It can be an objective, to carry the project to its end. But e-Portunus is somewhat an answer to that. For a few years now, we had a time when mobility was a strategic axis, very important in European projects and programs, and all of a sudden it was left aside, although without mobility there is no European cooperation. So e-Portunus, in point of fact, is part of this renewal, recentering on mobility. It's not necessarily on prospective mobility. You have the European Foundation for Culture, which has a fund called Step Beyond, who is looking into this issue, but about the Go and See grants. Go and see what's happening. Then you have to go and look at our funds. A lot of mobility funds existing in Europe. If you are a French artistic team, you do not necessarily have priority. The Roberto Cimetta Fund, which is another one, specialized for the Euro-Mediterranean, will particularly support the mobility of artists and cultural operators in the region. In France, due to the subsidized economy for performing arts, we also already have possibilities. What are talked about the choices in our budgets? And then we might agree to say we need public policies for mobility that we have talked about, kind of lobbying. We need to lobby for this prospective aspect for cooperation. That's how you create sustainability medium term. But we must not be mistaken. The market for performing arts in France is subsidized, but it remains a market. The market of dissemination has a deficit, including internationally. The French are not very competitive from that point of view. Well, just a word. We were talking about networks to start with. Also, these meeting points between stakeholders in different countries and between artists. We talk a lot about France, but there are countries in Europe developing funds, for instance, Nordic countries, which make it possible to create this type of exchange. And it is linked to the creation of projects by artists. Institut has European funding from Creative Europe, and in its work program it includes these professional meetings, the audience and so on. So I agree, this is closely linked to the project, and then for financial solutions you have to go and find them.
Yes, just a very quick question. I just wanted to say with respect to this question is, with prospecting and depending on the region, depending on the country as well, there's, consultants you have to explore without necessarily looking at sales. But, we had spectators, the audience, you had to finance it with respect to the perspective. And you had to go to the market. There were different events. Everything was just an isolated case each time. So, but what was important for us, for support, it's important for us as producers, etc., to talk about it all. And something that we haven't talked about it here, it's called the PASS. It's not really, I'm not advertising here, but it's administrating productions. And, it's really, and what they do is to go out and see these areas that are normally, closed-in places. And so, you need someone to plead your case, and so where do you go? To the ministries, the various local institutions, etc., to start act, and not necessarily to, make claims or, but you have to propose things and say that, beyond support that already exists, we also need to go prospecting, travel and develop all of this. And, so we have to kind of, pass the word and be bearers of the message, and of course the professionals have to get to know these. There are local groups, and nothing prevents you as a citizen to go there and try to move forward with those things. Go to your urban community, your county representatives, etc. You have to go out there and let them know your needs. And, as our dear Italian friend has said, so that it not be just a crazy idea of, some producer that wants money. No, you have to show them that it's an intelligent and very, smart move. So, okay, Olivier. Very quickly, just two things. We have to, work with what we have and, change what we have. So these actually go alongside one another. We mustn't mix the two. In the UK, of course, we have the Conservatives, and so we have to, work with what we've got. That's all. It keeps going downhill, being decreased all the time. And so you have to go to the stakeholders and, the policymakers. And in London, for example, I'm in London, so every Wednesday morning there's a meeting of all of the theater stakeholders, for example, and we go over what needs to be done, what action, what lobbying has to be done for what precise place or aspect, and you have to go and really knock it into their heads that you need help. Okay, I just wanted to add, to everything that was just said. There are two things. Actually, it's the love of it and what to do. Yes, you have to go out there. There's a lot of mechanisms, of course, on the move, for example. That's a good place to prove means and resources. It's fabulous work that's being done by that platform. And so you really have to invest in the idea of international if you want to do international. It's not something that you wait for next to your phone or to your in your emails. There is a mechanism that exists that we haven't spoken about, which is mentoring, with young companies or, companies that are just starting out. And so we've, it's all been set up, and there's also, discussion and exchange programs as well. I'm leaving for Norway to meet a Norwegian team, and we in Nice will be, receiving another group so that we can talk about very practical aspects, so it's very concrete. It's just a thought that I had. And of course, with these various, there's a lot of platforms that are being developed, and you have to use them. So, in case there's the last question, okay, no, I'm just looking, okay. Well, then, I thank the entire panel to have come here on Bastille Day, on the Sunday morning, to come here, and they all came up, Florence, Isabelle, Olivier, and Grégoire, of course, yes, thank you. And so thank you, Gabrielle, as well, who organizes this international focus session within the context of the Fringe Festival at Avignon, the Avignon Off. And so this, I hope this all helps Avignon and the Avignon Festival to beam out and grow. And so thank you. And the international focus is to continue at 2:30. You've all got the information anyway. So thank you a lot, and have a great summer and great festival. Bye now.